Good evening, everyone. My name is Ella Marchenko, and I'm the president of the Aurora Philosophy Institute. This evening, we welcome API associate Tom Muench as our speaker. Tom is well known to most of us living in the Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill area, and he is a former town councilor in Richmond Hill. He's speaking tonight on the rather appropriate topic of governance and local government in Ontario. Over to you, Tom.
Welcome, everybody. It should be quite fun. As John and Ella were saying, today's topic was the governance, or is the governance and local government in Ontario. I'd like to start by obviously thanking Ella and John for putting this together, and Bernadette for being at the library. A lot of people don't realize how great it is to be part of the library. I was on the library board in Richmond Hill, and I was part of Aurora, but it's really great that they're doing this. And I'd like to thank all of you for talking about psychology and how it works with, with governance and where we're going to go. A little bit about myself. As was previously mentioned, I'll try not to bore you in this presentation. I'm going to give you an overview, really quite exciting, let me assure you of that. Not only for tonight, but for days to come and months to come. The next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to be giving you a context. I'm willing to bet you all of you are going to learn something new today, regardless of your political or education or convocation. I have been an advocate for public policy for many, many years in various, in Canada, United States, and Germany, and got involved as a political representative by accident, actually, by being an advocate. I'm the guy in Canada who fought to save door-to-door mail delivery. On December the 11th, 2013, Canada Post announced they're going to stop mail delivery to people's homes, and I asked why, and I was a business owner who did a business called Wortman Cookies at that time, as well as an oil company. And I asked, why? Why are they making this change? And I kept hitting the business groups, and they asked me to go on to the media. They said, business people are looking at it. I got on CBC, and on a dare, they said, will you put your name forward? I did, and I got elected. And the day after the election, I sold the shares of my oil company, and then 3 years later, I sold my shares in Wortman Cookies. So when you go to the grocery store and you see a Wortman cookie, you might get a little bit of a laugh. The only non-sugar added cookie and wafers, and they have Christmas cookies coming out next week. I'm no longer affiliated with the company, but I can assure you they're great. Today's presentation will likely surprise you. I've got lots of little surprises. There's going to be a bit of a change in our slide presentation because we're not interactive. I'm going to be asking questions at the end that are rhetorical, and everyone's going to be able to have food for thought, and hopefully we'll have a discussion about that. It will be international, Canadian, with for sure a local flair. I was born and raised in Toronto, or in North York at Finch and Yonge. I went to school in the United States to study tennis. I actually have a tennis engineering degree. They call it that. It's not an engineering degree per se, but it's a technology-based of tennis. So in the 1980s, when somebody, or today, many of you would say, what are we doing with earned run average, or what are we doing with goals against average? And when we look at those various stats, in the old days, when someone would give a stats to a player, they'd say, I know it all. And I'm one of those people that you see those coaches behind the bench have those clipboards, and I'm one of those coaches that have clipboards and studied the game and have taught 4 top 1 players for more than 18 months in my lifetime, traveling on the tour with them. As a Canadian, I always say I'm a Canadian with no talent. There was. So I was involved in the business sector, came back to Canada in 1991. Got involved in management of 2 Fortune 100 companies, those being Thermo Fisher, Stanley, Tool and Door. I actually ran the revolving door in the cladding division of Stanley and the weighing, inspection, and monitoring division of Thermo Fisher Scientific as a regional manager there. So I also owned Wortman Cookies, as I mentioned. Oops, I went a little bit ahead of you here, guys. And those of you that are old enough may have heard of laminate. I hope you'll remember the term arborite. In 1993, the factory blew up in Concord, Ontario, And I'm the person who went to Switzerland to encourage him during Bob Rae days, situationist topic. When Bob Rae was Premier of this province, and our factory blew up. We had two factories, one in Concord, the other in Montreal or LaSalle. And I went to Switzerland to try to get them to reinvest for this hemisphere a factory in Ontario when a lot of people were saying we're in a recession, we should leave. And through the assistance of Bob Rae, we got to rebuild that factory and we created laminate flooring. And many people under the age of 35 will never know when I say laminate, say, oh yeah, laminate flooring. Well, 20 years ago, laminate was used for countertops. Next time you go to a variety store, you see that worn out green countertop, you might get a little bit of a chuckle. Anyway, so I'm going to go back into Canada. I'm going to start the presentation without further ado. And you'll notice I put there, does anybody know when Canada started? And a lot of you will say, of course I know, Canada started in 1867. Well, you know what? I'm going to give you a little bit of a history. In fact, Canada did not start in 1867. The Dominion of Canada did form. And in about 100 years earlier, in 1774, the British and the French were leaving settlers, and the British would dump off people at the higher part of the St. Lawrence. I'm going to call that Fort York or Upper Canada or the higher part of St. Lawrence. And the French would drop off people in Montreal. I'm going to call that the lower part of St. Lawrence or Lower Canada. Some might call it New France. And what happened is in 1774, almost 100 years earlier than the Dominion of 1867, the British went down to the French and said, hey, you know what, guys? The British and the French aren't coming. The supply ships aren't coming. They're battling so much. What's going on? So let's agree to trade guns and furs. And you guys in Lower Canada or New France can speak your own language, culture, and laws. If the Americans attack you, we'll help you. If the Americans attack us, you help us. And it's known as the Quebec Act of 1774. And then roughly 20 years later, in 1793, Benedict Arnold came up to through Buffalo and up through the Niagara Escarpment, and Laura Seacourt and others came into Fort York or Upper Canada and said, the Americans are coming. Oh my God, the Americans are coming. And they shot down to Lower Canada, and they Upper Canada, Lower Canada met in North Bay, and they marched down a street called Yonge Street. They kept coming south and south, and they met at Steeles and Yonge, the Confederation of Benedict Arnold at Yonge and Steeles. A shot was fired, nobody knows by who. And Benedict Arnold retreated, went back to the United States, and that was in 1793. In the War of 1812 or thereabouts, the American Revolution took place, where if you had a gun and you could protect your land, you got to keep it, but they never came north of the 49th parallel because of that one shot. And the American evolution and their right to bear arms never came into Canada. And then some 50 years later, after that 1812, 1867 was formed the Dominion of Canada. And that Dominion of Canada was held by four basic provinces: Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. And what took place is they said, you know what, we're going to have language laws. We're going to fall on what is Canada. Well, Canada stands for peace, order, and good government. We have different respectful in governance jurisdiction. And those governance jurisdiction means that the provincial governments and our federation of government formed an alliance. And we are the only country in the industrialized world that evolved through evolution. We've never had a war here because of that one gunshot of 1793. So Canada has the distinction of being the only G9 country that evolved, that didn't have a bare arms, as they would say. And that's why when many of you and many people would say, why do we speak French? And why does Canada know about peacekeeping? Well, because we evolved and we believe in the rule of law, and we respect our history, and we evolved as a nation through law and order. So if a government moves forward with a law, and that law is deemed unconstitutional or against the jurisdiction of those bodies, the court will overrule a government. Now, I won't go into the notwithstanding clause of the 1980s, but that's for another day when we have Pierre Trudeau came back, but that's enough for another day. So our Canada, in quick summary, was initially founded as the Dominion in 1867. And there were several differences for major provinces to come together to form a federation. The Canadian colonies got to know, or better known as the provinces, were allowed to retain their political control. So provinces have jurisdiction more so than the federal government, or maybe equal as so. And that pertains to local matters because now we have a national government with a relationship with provincial counterparts to form more complicated exterior or national issues, whereas the local or regional or provincial have their jurisdiction. This method of sharing power with multiple levels of government are known as a philosophy known as federalism. So here we are talking about Philosophy Institute, and we have to understand where we're going. So why is Canada a bilingual country? Why was it created? And what does it mean? Well, now you know. So here we are, 1867, we formed a division of power. We follow law and order. We have this great book of Constitution of Canada, formerly called the Dominion. You know, it's sort of funny in the United States, the first thing they say are, we the people. Well, here we in Canada said again, for peace, order, law, and good government. Our federal government makes national laws. I'm talking about our federal government only now. They're defining what our federal government is, what our provincial government, what our other governments are. There are three fundamental governments in Canada. Those stand for federal, provincial, and local, also known as municipal. What does our federal national government do on national issues? They look after our citizenship, our criminal law, our copyright, our employment insurance, our foreign policy, money and banking, national defense, regulation of trade. I put post office in there because obviously I have an interest in the post office because of my legacy in Canada and my life of being involved in protecting the post office as a crown corporation. And that's a whole topic for another day. And census, once again, is another matter. Our provincial government is a little bit different, and it has jurisdictional powers. So many people say, get really sexy on federal government or really sexy on provincial. Each have what's called a division of powers. And through the federation of this large, more powerful, and this provincial that makes our country so vast, we have regional issues and regional difference. What does our provincial government do? They look after as a region, healthcare, hospitals. They look after education. You'll see this week, a lot of people are happy our educators are back to work, as I am. We have administration of law. That could be family law, for example, or delegated law. We have housing. Tonight's discussion will be talking about housing. The provincial government has jurisdiction on housing, not the federal government. So when you hear some of the leaders talk about the federation of housing, we'll go into that. The provincial governments have jurisdiction on that. Property and civil rights in Ontario, highways, but not roads, labor standards, social services, fishing licenses, driver's license, natural resources, and the environment. So we have this kind of cool thing talking about what the federal government is, or what the provincial government is, what municipal governments are, and what are shared relationships, which I'm going to go into. Going into our bigger topic of today, when you look at what our local governments do, local governments are delegated powers from the provincial government, not the other way around. Municipalities are not in the Constitution of Canada, but the provinces are. And they delegate authority, much like a business would, when they'll have business units elsewhere. We get delegated those authorities given to municipalities, and there's 444 municipalities in Ontario, and each of them are allowed to do their projects locally based upon their own flair, as long as they meet the provincial guidelines. And the province requires those municipalities to write those guidelines down. They're known as official plans, and we are obligated to follow those plans. Although, little footnote, we are in a housing crisis. We're in a arguably health crisis with COVID. If I had told some of you maybe 3-4 years ago, we were going to shut down the economy, make people have masks, change the way we do life and how life is going to be lived, and you would have thought I was nuts. But we're in an equal housing crisis right now. Canada has less housing per capita than anywhere else in the Western world. Say that again. Canada has less homes and less jobs per capita than anywhere else in the Western world, which is why many, many provinces are saying we're in a crisis. Just to give you guys a number, there's 17.5 million people in the population of Ontario, representing 3% of the population of North America. Yet 30% of the least affordable or most expensive places to live are in Ontario. So it's a big challenge there. But municipalities look after our delegated authority of housing, community planning, infrastructure, water, police, fire, and ambulatory services, transit, public health, municipal taxation, senior housing, storm sewers, which is a big topic, snow and garbage, recycling, long-term care, user fees, municipal bylaws, municipal courts. Isn't that interesting? We have provincial courts, and in the late 2018, the province said we can't afford to create new courts, so they allowed municipalities to form their own court for their own bylaws. So municipalities manufacture laws or create laws. They assemble those laws through their bylaw officers, and they actually have courts to do as well. Isn't that funny? We have municipalities have parks and rec, animal control, economic development, library services, that's who's hosting us tonight, social services, property assessment, childcare, arts and culture. So what is the role of local government in Canada? Well, government provides significant economic and cultural direction. Let me go back there. I don't know, I put that here. You'll notice number 18 on this previous slide, we have economic development. Many of you will think that that's a federal provincial matter, actually delegated to municipalities. That's, I didn't know that. So what is the role of government and local government in Canada? Well, they provide significant economic and cultural direction, both budget and related acts. So I guess I ask a question here, and you're going to find I'm going to give lots of rhetorical questions. Do all of us want economic prosperity, success, freedom? Do we? Some of us don't realize we don't. For example, it takes this is a very expensive part of the world to live in here in Ontario. Gas is expensive, housing is expensive, food's expensive, although less than Florida. It takes 2.1 to 2.3 people per household to maintain economic growth. We have less birth rate currently. It's roughly around 1.6 per household. So our federal government in recent weeks have raised immigration to the highest levels to 500,000 people. Last year, there were 401,000 people coming to Canada. 20,000 people a month are coming to the Greater Toronto Area. This year, it's scheduled to have 411,000. So what is government? Who decides what the vision of our community is going to be? Is government accountable? Should we spend? And if we spend, what do we spend and how do we spend? Should government be focused on primary tasks, or should we focus on an ideological based? We're in a psychology institute or group right now, and it's really interesting. You hear things like, what is the political spectrum? What is left versus right? If I ask somebody in Texas what a left versus right is, or I ask somebody in Ukraine what left versus right is, if I ask somebody in Aurora or Newmarket or Toronto, I wonder what that answer will be. I wonder what people here at our association here will say, what is left versus right? Whoops, I'm sorry. I was fast. Sorry. So I'm going to talk about taxes and our history of taxes in Canada. When we look at our taxes, can anybody, and I'm going to just take it off the screen for a moment. Can anybody name, I was going to do this, but I'm not allowed to go in and out of Zoom here because of the way we're doing it, so that's my fault. Sorry, guys and gals. So can anybody name some different types of taxes? I'm going to let you think about that. I hope you can think about what type of taxes, and if you want, I'm going to list some of them. You know, it's sort of funny, the personal income taxes and corporate taxes initially began in 1917. 1917 was when income taxes and corporate taxes came in. And you'll notice here, I put on my slide, 1941. My second slide was 41, 1941. Why? Because there was an agreement made by the provinces to give back taxing powers. So the provinces agreed to give the federation income tax exclusivity. It wasn't constitutionally powerful, but it's something they agreed to afterwards. Many people will assume the federation is this big body and they delegate all these powers. They kind of do with regards to money. So they say, hey, Mr. Province, I'll give you money if you do the following on a national program, like universal healthcare, for example. But it wasn't always like that. It was only because the provinces picked up, which is why they have what's called the first ministers or premiers conferences with the prime minister. So different types of taxes include, in no particular order, export taxes, custom taxes. What are excise taxes? Tobacco and gas. Recently, there was I didn't put in here, a carbon tax. That's a form of excise, I guess. And you'll see that the provincial government reduced taxes on gas, and immediately you saw the price in the pump drop. You'd be surprised how much percentage of our gas is more expensive, which is why BC has more expensive gas than here in Ontario. It's because of those taxes. There's a gas tax, there's a customs duties and tariffs tax, property taxes, development taxes, storm taxes. We have a rain tax. When it rains, you're paying a tax if you own a home. We have a park tax. For you to have right to a proximity to a park, there's a tax, but you didn't know that. There are user fees. There's employment, also known as an EI or employment insurance, Canada pension plan tax. There's a health tax, licensing taxes. This time you guys, Doug Ford gave some money back recently because we weren't using the roads. And there's a social security. There's also known as a GST. A GST is a hated tax. Hated tax. Do you guys remember that? Gals, I guess. Anybody know when the GST was formed? Anybody want to guess in your mind? I'm going to bring it back. It was actually in 1991. Was the GST a new tax or did it replace a tax? You guys, I'm going to let you think about that. Did the GST replace a tax or was it a new tax? Well, the answer is it replaced a tax. And it replaced it a manufacturing sales tax. Why is this important? Because today it's a big discussion. Because we have taxes on people that manufacture today called development tax and a park tax. And some of those businesses are saying, why am I being taxed for manufacturing? And the people who are receiving the services don't realize that others are actually paying that. So when you guys get access to a park or there's a new investment in a park, or if you see a new community center, that is not paid for by your taxes, believe it or not. So what is government to you? What is the role of government? What should the psychology of government be? Let's go through that again. Let's ponder. What is government? What is a government in the United States? What is a government in China? What is a government in Australia? Here in Canada, we're part of the Westminster model, based out of the UK, because the UK trumped over French. And when the Upper Canada, Lower Canada formed, and we followed the British monarchy and the British North American system, we follow this Commonwealth Westminster model. So we follow a British common model of our governance. And that's how we deal with the higher chamber, the Senate and the Legislative Assembly being the House of Commons. And that goes the same thing with the local chambers. What is the role, though, of government beyond its people, as you see in the screen of the picture? What are these people sitting around doing? And who decides? And how open and transparent are they? And how consistent are they going to be? And you know, do we provide economic guidance on budgets? Well, what is the definition of a budget? I put there for questions that I want to come back to during our conversation. The four big questions are, who in Ontario today pays for new sewers? Who pays for new sidewalks and roads, new community centers, and new libraries? You guys all just think about that for a moment. Who pays for new sewers, new sidewalks and roads, new community centers, and new libraries. I can't do a rhetorical because of Zoom, but we're going to come back to that. So the four things I'm going to ask you all, what is that going to be? And when you see buildings like that are coming up here, you say, oh my God, look at those buildings. Oh my God. Well, the theory in Ontario, I'm going to come back here, is who pays for new sewers, new sidewalks and roads, new community centers, new libraries? I'd be willing to bet you many of you said taxpayers. But the truth is, no. And because many people think that taxpayers or property taxpayers or governments pay for that, governments don't create money. Governments receive funds, they distribute funds. Well, where do they receive these money from? They receive it from new home buyers. Many people call the developer. The developer doesn't pay. It's a cost doing business. They pass that cost onto the new home buyer. And as we in Ontario have the most expensive homes, people are saying, I can't afford it. So what the provincial government are doing on October 25th, the day after the last municipal election, they said, you know what? If you, Mr. Business, Mr. Builder, if you decide to build and you are building with a housing concept in mind that are going to make it affordable for homes and affordable for families, then you do not have to pay a development charge tax. You don't have to pay a parkland tax. And municipalities are now who people are saying they don't want growth, they don't want development. If people want new roads, they want new community centers, new fire stations, new sewers, new libraries, then the tax base are going to pay for it. And that's where the trend is going right now in Ontario. And by the way, Ontario is the unique jurisdiction that has these development charges and parkland tax do not exist in the United States and many parts of Canada. So this high-rise buildings that you see right here that are not in York Region, by the way, but just took it out of Toronto. So this particular picture, you'll see a high-rise. What's really funny as it relates to governance, if anybody knows anybody in a high-rise, you have to pay maintenance fees. And in those maintenance fees, that includes costs for garbage and costs for snowplow services and grass cutting. Many of you who have homes, when you pay tax, you say, of course my garbage is going to be picked up. Of course my snowplow service is going to come. Well, these homeowners in high-rise actually subsidize the residential tax base. So that's why Toronto can afford business taxes and have high-rise per capita, and they help keep the property tax in Toronto lower despite increasing services, for example, relative to other jurisdictions. So what is livability? What is sustainability? Right? What is livability? And what is sustainability? What does it mean to be prosperous and successful? We in Canada, always in Ontario, said growth pays for growth. So if some of you said in the last 20 years, hey, you know what? I remember walking by and that area used to look like this. Now it looks like that. And what we would do is we would say at the municipal level, I say we because I used to be involved in municipal government, I would say, hey, Mr. Business, if you're growing here, you only are going to have to pay for that sewer. And you only are going to pay for that road and that concrete and that sidewalk. And you only are going to have to pay for that Canada Post box. Regular taxpayers don't pay for that. And you only are going to have to pay for that bridge and that link up to the sewer. And all that gets added to the selling price of homes, which is why the price of a home here is more expensive than many other jurisdictions that are similar in nature. Not just land base or where your geography is. It actually matters on how your taxation matters. Here's a question. Should infrastructure be built first? Should we build infrastructure first, or do we wait for growth to happen to get that? So the current premier of the province made a very unique point where he says, I'm going to build subways and bridges and highways. And he's doing it alone. York Region just built a transit system based upon a growth model, and they've front-loaded those costs only to be paid back by future development, not by taxpayers, although that's about to change. So all those people out there who said, yeah, I love all these services, this is great, and I'm paying for it, not true. And now the province, we're going into an inflationary period because in the last 20 years, 25 years, since 1995, so I guess that's 27 years, we have been going into declining cost of living. And what often comes up comes down, or what goes down often goes up. Ask Alberta with regard to oil. And now the price of cost of life is getting higher. Now so does everything else. Should taxation be consistent and transparent? I bet you none of you knew that there was a parkland tax, or not. I bet you some of you did not know there was a parkland tax. And some of you did not know that there's a development tax, or how the GST was new relative to a manufacturer sales tax, which was 13.5%. Should governments be innovative in terms of providing for its residents, like libraries, or should simply just follow the process? As things happen, they move at that point. It's an open-ended question, and it's philosophical. If you remember a few slides earlier, I said, what is this political spectrum, left versus right? Left being, generally speaking, on the far left would be socialist, on the far right would be fascist. Okay? So here we go. My next slide is, do budgets balance themselves? Has anybody ever heard that? Budgets just balance themselves. There's a well-known politician, the leader of our country, our prime minister said, budgets just balance themselves. And I'm going to tell you, folks, after 7 years of being in municipal government, I lost in the election on October 24th because I supported growth and I supported prosperity where many people said no. And I lost because of it. Sort of funny. There were ads, which I'll gladly share with any of you, who said, oh my God, this guy reduced taxes. Shame on him. We like high taxes and higher taxes. They said, oh my God, this guy wants open and transparent government. He doesn't want to see fraud and online voting. We like fraud. Don't vote for this guy. Truth, I can show you the ads. For me, it was comical. I didn't fight back, but it was an aha moment. Because when they say budgets budget themselves, the culture of government is, it doesn't matter what it costs. The ratepayers are going to pay because they don't create money, they distribute money. And to give you guys a number, nonpartisan, between 2020 and 2022, there were 400,000 jobs created in the Canadian economy. Of those 400,000 jobs that are created in the Canadian economy between 2020 and 2022, 355,000 of them were public sector. 45,000 private sector people are paying for 355,000 of it. Is that sustainable? I don't know. Some people say we don't pay enough tax. I want more. We like it. We like having unaffordability in our market. And today, for the first time in Canadian history, despite having the highest immigration coming into Canada and in Ontario at 20,000 people a month, 20,000 people a month are migrating to the greater Toronto Hamilton area. But 20,500 are leaving to the East Coast and Alberta. And you'll hear ads in the news, and you'll hear others. And nurses and PSWs and others are saying, hey, you know what? We can't afford to do business here. And businesses are divesting. And what's happening is, as we're now heading into an inflationary period and we have debts and budgets, what are we going to do? Are we going to continue with a high structural area? Canada's 155 years old since our Dominion of 1867. What are we going to do? Who is government? Are they about the people? Is it a body? Is it about an emperor? Is it about having a dictatorship? Is it about where it's going to go? So I'm going to say, should local government have a budget? Should it manage that budget? I say local, that can be regional or national. Should we stick to a budget? Should there be resolve? Should there be accountability? Does anybody really know where those budgets come from? When I mentioned the taxes a while back here, and I look at those export taxes, custom taxes, excise taxes, gas taxes, GST, stormwater park, people say there's one taxpayer. Nonsense. There's not one taxpayer. For example, the business community, when they pay the park tax and nobody else pays that tax, they're just a ratepayer. When the person has employment insurance, not everybody pays that rate. Should we pay for cash or should we work on this model? And when somebody says, hey, I'll let you do that job for cash, do we rise up to say that's against our standard? Question. So I come back on my conclusion here. Who pays for new sewers, new sidewalks, roads, and community centers and libraries? Who pays for growth? And in summary, I want to thank you all for doing this today. I'm hoping we can have a dialogue thereafter. Canada stands for peace, order, and good government. Governments follow a process. So for example, if I say to some of you, I'll meet you at the Blue Jay game, here's some tickets, I'll meet you there. And on the 7th inning, I arrive. You guys say, what took you so long? When did you leave? As soon as I said. Well, what do you mean? It's the 7th inning, you missed the game. Well, I followed our process. What process did you follow? Well, that's the process stated. I took the 404 down to the 401 in my car. I went east on the 401 to Highway 48 or Markham Road. I went south to Kingston Road, taking Kingston Road across to the Skydome. People said, why'd you do that? Why didn't you just come down to the DDP? Or why didn't you take transit? Or why didn't you go down Yonge Street? I followed our process. Doesn't matter if it's innovative, that's the way that life follows in government. And if you challenge that process, I'm sorry, we follow the process. If we don't follow the process, it becomes a court challenge because Canada stands for law and order, peace and good government. Canada has 3 jurisdictions, federal, provincial, municipal. Who decides public policy? Is it a politician? Is it a bureaucrat? Is it a resident? Is it a business? Is it the courts? Is it lobbyists? Who decides? It's an open interpretation. I can tell you privately what I've experienced. Who's accountable for public policy? And does it really matter? And does our history matter? And do we follow the rule of law? And do we care about the way that our Constitution is based? And do we practice that bilingual culture of language, culture, and laws that made the foundation of our Quebec Act and our Canada? And what is Canada and what is government? And my answer is, it's evolving. So I'd like to thank you, Alla and John, really. It is a really cool organization talking about what it means to be part of an association of psychology and sociology, well-read, having a discussion and making a difference and have a philosophical engagingness. And thank you for Canada for allowing us to even have this. There are some parts of the world that would not allow this to take place. And I say to you, it's never forgotten what it means to have free speech, free discussion, and a choice. So above that, I'm going to send it back to you guys. I thank you all, and I hope you have a great day. I hope I answered some of your questions. And if you want, I can go back to those questions, and you guys can go back and engage the way you wish. Thank you.